Well, welcome to Talking Europe. Now, when the EU recommended this month that Georgia be granted candidate status for EU membership, the offer came with a pretty big string attached. If it ever hopes to join the bloc, Georgia would have to heal a deeply polarized society, and it would have to shore up its democracy. Now, none of this dampened the enthusiasm of large crowds who celebrated the news in the streets of the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. And sharing in their jubilation is my guest today, Georgia's French-born president, Salomé Zourabichvili. Now, she was elected to the largely ceremonial presidency back in 2018. And back then, she had the support of Georgia's ruling Georgian Dream Party. Now we're 5 years later, fast forward. And we're also 1 month after the president escaped impeachment in her parliament. Why? For visiting Europe without the government's consent. Now, Georgia's president suspects that the Georgian Dream Party is perhaps a little less committed to Europe and to Western values in general than the party would have us believe. Welcome very much to the show and taking the time, President Zourabichvili. I will tell our viewers, you're not physically here in Paris. You are via Skype from Tbilisi, Georgia. But thank you for being here. To the chase.
Good evening.
Yeah, look, it's been a month, I think, almost to the day since they failed, the ruling party failed to impeach you. And they accused you of visiting Europe. And why were you in Europe? You were here, as you say, in a private capacity. And you were here to try, as you put it, to boost Georgia's chances of joining the EU. Now, here's what I want you to explain to me. Your government, at least on paper, and your prime minister tweeted this the other day, showed himself with Emmanuel Macron saying he's delighted to meet the French president and is delighted that France is helping Georgia on its path to Europe. Am I missing something here? Doesn't your government agree with you?
Well, at least it did agree with me at the very beginning when I was elected, that you recall just right now. And if I was elected, it was partly because of the support of the majority ruling party at that time. But it was also with the support, because I was elected by the population, with the support of a population that is definitely pro-European, has been pro-European since the independence of Georgia 30-some years ago, and sees me as an ex-European and future European leader of Georgia and leading Georgia into Europe, which I've been doing constantly since my election. 5 years have passed, and my foreign policy, in which I have partly a ceremonial role, but also that of representing the state of Georgia and representing the European aspirations of Georgia that are enshrined in our constitution, and which obliges me to do everything in my capacity possible to boost European candidature, to boost European integration, European path of Georgia. And hence, I consider that what happened with the advice given by the European Commission that prejudges in a way the decision that will be taken by the European Council on December 15 is a very major step. And the result of that very major step is the fact, and I welcome that, is the fact that the Georgian government leaders have started again to talk a very pro-European language, which for some time they had subdued in some ways. But since the decision, they're very clearly, and the visit to Macron was part of that, they're very clearly saying that they salute this decision and they're going in that direction. So if that is the new consensus in Georgia, I can only be very glad about that.
You recently, you were speaking to your country's parliament. This was when they moved to hold that impeachment vote. And you criticized the Georgian Dream Party for, as you put it, showing Russia too much respect. And perhaps not the same amount of respect for Europe. And there's something I still don't understand here. It almost seems like a game to me with this government. Is this government treating Putin with too much respect? How are they doing so, in your opinion, if that's the case?
I would call that complacency, and that might be one of the results after the war and during the war in Ukraine, that some of these leaders are impressed by what Russia might be trying to do in Georgia or towards Georgia to compensate for what I view as already a defeat of Russia in Ukraine. So I understand that some people might, in front of such perspective, feel fear, but I do not share that. I think that the best defense is the solidarity of the European Union. The best defense is to be within our community, our family. And what we see is that the only red line that Russia in the end respects is the line of EU and NATO. And that's what my country wants. That's what the population wants. There is just an opinion poll that has just been published today, and where we see that the support for European Union has jumped from 80% of the population to 86%, and the support to NATO has jumped from 72 to 76, if I'm correct.
It's tremendous. It's a very, very high support for both NATO and for EU membership. And yet, and I keep getting back to this sort of core question here, Madam President, Irakli Garibashvili, the Prime Minister of the Georgian Dream Party, he has refused to impose sanctions on Russia for its war against Ukraine. He even recently suggested that NATO is to blame for the war. Now, I guess you would strongly disagree with him. Do you meet with him? Do you tell him what you think? Do you tell him the Georgian people don't agree with his party's policy?
I tell the Georgian people to agree with what policy I recommend and follow. And I know that that's a policy that the Georgian people are following. For what reason is inspiring the Prime Minister? I think that you would have to address that question to him. I'm not here to either represent his words or to criticize him publicly outside of the country, because I think that depolarization of our country is something that is very important for the future. But what I know is that I am representing what is the very, very large majority view of the Georgians, that they want to be in Europe. Those were the people that were demonstrating. Demonstrating is not a word. We were rejoicing in front of my palace a few days ago. And we're still collecting hundreds of signatures, thousands of signatures, in fact, to consolidate this advice of the Commission into a decision of the European Council in the very coming days.
I want to ask you something else about Russia. It has been 15 years, I don't have to remind you, since Russia invaded parts of your country. Moscow's troops are still present today in both Abkhazia and in South Ossetia. Russia occupies about 20% of Georgia's territory, and that's about what they occupy right now in Ukraine. Do you think Russia, is Georgia next? Does Russia have the same designs on Georgia as it had on Ukraine?
I think Georgia was first and Ukraine was next, if we take the chronology of what happened and our occupied territories and the recognition of their independence. And the fact that nobody reacted seriously in the West to that is probably what paved the way for Russia to attempt what it's doing in Ukraine. But it has encountered in Ukraine a very strong resistance. It's a much larger country, a much stronger country, and probably all of the hopes of Mr. Putin were defeated by the resilience that the president of Ukraine, the population of Ukraine has shown in front of this immense attack, tragedy, and aggression. But Russia is losing, has lost already its prestige, the prestige of the Russian army. Whether it's going to be tempted to do something in Georgia, it's always something that we have in the back of our minds. And that is why we need European support. We need to be aligned with our partners. That's why we need to apply those sanctions that we can apply. And I want to underline that nobody has asked Georgia, because of the place where it is, because of its geopolitical pressures and the occupied territory, nobody has asked Georgia to have national sanctions against Russia. But we are part of the international financial sanctions, and it's very important that we say so. I don't know why we hide behind something. We are applying international financial sanctions. Our banks are over-compliant and will continue to do so. We are on the Western side. There is no doubt about that, and will continue to be.
We have a little time left, and I want to ask you a general concern. I mentioned at the beginning that the European Union clearly wants Georgia to one day be a part of Europe. And there were days when most people actually looked at Georgia and said Georgia is a democratic trailblazer among post-Soviet states. Do you think that this is something now, a goal that's further away or getting closer, given the fact many in Europe say there's been, and I'm quoting, democratic backsliding, going backwards in Georgia?
Well, you know, and I know that there are backslidings in many different countries, including within the European Union at different times. And what is important is the will of the people again, the determination. We have a very important year in front of us. We have elections next year in October, and I think that will be the test. We are receiving in advance, in a way, the candidate status as a sign of trust into the Georgian people and in trust in its institutions. I hope they will be consolidated. And I make sure that together with the population and together with all the forces that are for Europe, we will lead a front in those elections that will show that Georgia is where it should be, going towards Europe and getting into Europe.
And final question, we are out of time, but President Zourabichvili, are you planning to come back to Europe anytime soon? And will you ask the government this time if you can come?
Well, I've been back to Paris just recently for the peace conference, and I didn't ask. I think it doesn't make sense.
Understood.
But I will be, I want to make the precision, I will be where I think it will be needed again for that main objective, which is to support, consolidate that main objective of getting status candidate and getting us where we should be on that European path.
President
I won't travel
Zourabichvili.
for the pleasure of traveling.
Madam President, we are out of time. I thank you tremendously for being with us today. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching us here on Talking Europe.